Well, hello again. You recall the last thing I was going to do was fill in the landscaping around on the castle, and I said I'd come back when I'm doing that. Well, we're in the process of doing this. What I've done so far, I've laid down some light greys. You can see here there's a light grey wash, which I've then darkened down a little bit in pardon me, in the appropriate places to give the rock formations. And this time I've gone to my computer. You can't really see there, can you? But the photograph that I took, that I'm doing the copy from, is on the computer, and I've been able to bring up the detail so that I can get the detail onto here. I'm now going to use quite a fine brush on this. This is a 0 brush, size 0, because I want to get a little bit more detail in with the colouring. So just got to be careful, I don't want to spill anything anywhere else. Okay. I've now got to sort of create the areas that are darker, more in shade and shadow. It's still quite subtle. There will be even darker areas coming into this as well. And vegetation isn't as difficult to paint, I think, as a lot of people think it is, because it's representational. Unless you're doing a detailed watercolour of a plant that you know, for research or for illustrating a book or something, you don't need huge amounts of detail. It's just a case of sorry, we're out of focus, aren't we? It's just a case of getting the representations in of the vegetation. You want people to be able to look at that and say, oh, vegetation, rather than, what is that? Is it rock or what? So I'm going to continue on with this, and then I'll come back and show you the finished result of this current layer, this next layer. Right, so that's the almost finished work here. The area here I've got to bring down darker, which I shall do in a moment. Give it some shape and form because it's raised, it's a raised bush. And I've just started putting in the first layer of the next lot of rock formation, which is quite a large expansive rock formation with a little bit of greenery in the middle bit. I had actually filmed doing this, but a glitch on my camera meant that it wasn't actually recorded, so you haven't had the benefit of seeing that, but I shall carry on with that in a moment and you'll be able to see the process for that. But in the meantime, I just want to give this a bit more shape and form. Now, again, the camera is not good for demonstrating this. I should be using my proper video camera, but sorry about that. Not much I can do about that now. It's darkest along the bottom edge, obviously. That's where the greatest amount of shadow is going to be, but it also carries on because it's darker vegetation altogether than what was on there underneath that. We're just going to use that underbelly of green as as highlights rather than the actual colour of the bush. It is a lot darker. didn't make up quite enough paint, I don't think, to do this. Struggling to get the last little bit out there. Right. So that's that's what. And as I said before, it is just representational. It doesn't have to be, you know, a detailed bush. But I shall, when I come to the pen work, I shall put in a little bit more detail on that, just to give it more of a plant look. Okay, onto the cliff for the minute while that one dries. Now, what I was showing you before, which didn't get filmed, is the rock formation here, which comes to just past the edge of the tower. A little bit of greenery in there, a little bit of greenery on the top, and a little bit of greenery at the bottom. But you can see the highlights and lowlights there. And so on this bit here, we've got the first layer in. I've used the drawing as reference for where some of the lowlights are going to go, and I did wet on wet. In other words, while the lighter grey was still damp, I added another layer of the same colour grey over the top and just made it a bit darker. And as in the original picture, it comes down just past the edge of that tower. So now we're going to add in some darker, even darkerer references here again, and I am looking at the drawing, the painting, no, the photograph, get it right, Caulfield, to get my references for where the light and shade is going to go, and the shapes. It's all this rock formation is sloping quite dramatically across. If you've ever been to Bamburgh Castle, it is the most amazing place to visit. Absolutely stunning. It's obviously steeped in history, and if you like Bernard Cornwell novels, his Last Kingdom series, which I read avidly, are all about this castle and the quest of the hero of the book to try and return and take his family castle back. And they call it Bamburgh, which presumably is what it used to be called. Bernard Cornwell was usually pretty accurate with his research and his writing. So just trying to create some of these lowlights. Now, you remember I said before how in watercolour you tend to work from dark to light. Well, I am in a way, because this will get darker, but I leave the highlights, such as on this side. A lot of those highlights were reinforced with the white gouache, which is not transparent like other watercolour paints, so it will sit on top, and it's really good for doing highlights and things, and for correcting mistakes too. Always a bonus. Now again, I'm doing wet on wet here, so while the other layer is still wet, I'm adding in some even darker tones, and I don't mind that they'll bleed together, because when you're dealing with something like a landscape or rock or whatever, it can add texture and form to what it is you're drawing or painting. And the reference photograph is quite vital for things like this. It does make a huge difference when you've got something you can actually refer to. Remembering again, as I say, even these darker areas will dry down 50% lighter than they're coming out now. There's quite a dramatic bit of dark rock there. And this line here is vegetation from there. More vegetation than rock. I will put some rock in it, but it is more vegetation than rock. Right, okay, quite happy with that. Doesn't look much at the moment, but it develops, okay, and we will try and give it a bit more shape and form as we go. And the temptation is to keep tinkering, and you mustn't do it. And look what I'm doing now, I'm tinkering. There we go. Right, I'll come back to that shortly when that's dried off. So I've added a little bit of green to this side just to give some form to the rocks. This is now, I've added some greenery around, darkened some bit down, brought it in along the bottom a little bit, and we're now going to do a little bit more of the rock detail. And sticking with my Payne's grey, to make sure that it's not too dark. No, I think that's about right. Just want to give it a bit of a bit more definition. Drag it down in places. I think what I may need to do is give myself some reference. Is just add in some of the highlights. That's my gouache, just a tiny little bit, which is all you need really. I'm using that neat. You can see there's virtually none. Where are we? Is that going to focus in for me? Probably not. There's virtually none on that tip. You see it? Just a little bit on there. So again, using the photograph as the reference point, I'm just going to start adding in a couple of the highlights, because that helps me get my form and see where I'm going to put more of the shadows. Now there's so using it slightly diluted, you can then get a more of a sort of a rock formation out of it, and I use it stronger for when I get to the highlights that I need. Now that rock there, I will put in a little bit of a highlight on it. I need a little bit more water on my brush actually to lift that off. Let's just tap that in there. There we go. And this is a fairly long streak of highlight coming down there, with a sharp edge to that, which is quite nice, quite pleasant, and that just goes around over the top there a little bit, and then back down the other side. There is also vegetation there. bit more highlight over this side to this bit down here. See how quickly that fades in as it dries quite quickly. Let's get a bit more water on the brush so I can just lift a bit more gouache off there. It's drying out. That's the problem with it, of course. These watercolours do dry in the palette, and although sometimes it's good to use them neat, sometimes you can't because they've dried out. You've got to add a bit of water to get them to come to life again. So adding a few highlights in. A few strokes to give the impression of the slope. Okay. Quite pleased with the way that's coming on. I shall carry on with that, and I shall come back to you when I think it's more or less finished. I think that rock formation is just about done at the moment. I will probably be adding more, titivating it, as they say, later. I'm just going to add a little bit more to this section, and then I'm going to add the rest of the green along here with all the rest of the rocks, etc, etc. So what I'm going to do is carry on with that. When I've finished all that area here, I'll come back to you and we shall do the main sort of meadow area there, and that will more or less be the picture finished. Well, hey, thanks for your time, and I'll see you again soon.